Welcome. This is Behind the Lens, and my name is Tom Blank, an ongoing conversation on anything relating to film in the city of Eugene, Oregon. My guest today is Doug Hennessy, a film critic of some standing. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, we want to find out how you came to be a critic in the first place. Can you kind of just start and...
It's a long and winding road. When I was a kid, my father used to subscribe to the New York Times, and every time we got the paper, the only parts I read were the film reviews. And when he used to take trips to New York, I used to ride with him and go see some of the art films, whereas most of my friends as a teenager were watching, I don't know, The Parent Trap or Westerns or something. I was up seeing Fellini and Bergman when I was a teenager. So I was already different at that age from other familiar film viewers.
And how did you know that you wanted to spend your life reviewing movies?
Well, that happened as sort of a fluke. When I got out of college, I wanted to be a writer. First of all, film reviewers want to be writers. I mean, you are right, and you write to be read. So when I got out of college, I wanted to go to Paris and be a Hemingway character and write the great American novel. And I heard one way to make money while you're writing your novel is to write reviews. So I started doing some book reviews. And then I went to a writers' conference, which had a Knight Ridder film critic there who was running the workshop, and he did a writing contest. The person who got first prize got to go to the critic screenings. So I got first prize, I got to go to critic screening, and I just started freelancing film reviews from there.
It was all downhill after that then. So that, you know, you were, by that time, a film critic, but what was the next step? What was the next thing that...
The next step was to go to see the screenings. It's interesting to see things in a screening as opposed to in a theater with people. You have like 4 or 5 guys, most of whom are trying to stay awake for the movies because they've seen movies and they know it inside and out, and they're trying not to keep from being bored. It's different when you're in a whole theater full of people and people react and you kind of join in the reaction. Here it's very cynical, hard-edged people who are very critical. And you see different kinds of movies that you never would see in a regular run theater.
Can you give me any examples of movies that particularly affected you?
Yeah, the first one that I got printed was The Rain People, a Francis Ford Coppola movie, which he did before The Godfather, which had James Caan in it, and which I had never seen before. And it was a movie, when you go in and see a movie and you know nothing about it, and you're a blank screen and you're just trying to filter your impressions and get them back out in a prose form, that's how it works. And that's a whole new way of thinking about films. It also sharpens what you see, and it also is a whole new way of communicating what you see to the reader.
I think that's something that we miss today is anticipation and a sense of a kind of ritualism in going to the theater to see a movie. I mean, when I was a kid, I would go to those grand movie palaces in Chicago once in a while, and it was like they were enormous. There were 3 balconies. There were stars in the ceiling, and when it came time for the movie to start, the curtain would open and music would happen, and you had a kind of intake of breath that said, yeah, I don't know what's next.
Right. And so as a critic, you don't have that kind of anticipation. You just have, oh my God, what am I going to see now? How am I going to keep from being cynical about some more crap I have to sit through? And when you see a good movie, it's such a release and such a joy. That's the difference, I think, between people now. They choose movies they want to see, they know they're going to like ahead of time. So that anticipation is, wow, it's going to give me what I want. It's going to delight me. And if it doesn't, then it fails.
So we're talking about audiences at that time were familiar with the genres that were available, right, out of Hollywood. And they chose particular genres because they knew what to expect.
Right, like the Western, the romantic comedy. They had domestic dramas then too.
The melodramas.
Melodramas, yeah. What people, I get in this conversation a lot. What makes the critic different from the regular movie goer? And the thing I think is we have more tolerance for movies that go against expectations and movies that leave you with a sense of openness and what I call angst. They don't have to resolve everything and make you feel good by the time you leave the theater. We enjoy things that challenge our expectations and that are different from the usual.
Well, as I've talked about the concept that you're mentioning now, I've often said that anxiety is the mother's milk of the film director.
Right.
Because you must elicit a particular response from your audience, and one of the easiest way is to create some sort of anxiety.
Right, you want to create conflicts, which creates anxiety, but then most films today want to resolve that anxiety by the time the movie's over. And I think what difference what critics like is they don't have to have that resolution to feel satisfied about the movie.
Right, so what we're talking about is the thwarted expectation kind of movie where, can you give me an example of a movie that has thwarted your expectations?
A movie that has thwarted my expectations that I didn't like or liked?
Well, either one.
Well, one I didn't like was Fast and Furious, or not Fast and Furious, Furious 7 actually is the title. It fulfilled my expectations, but I didn't like it anyway because I knew what to expect. And what I call is vroom, vroom, crash, crash, explode, explode, and then Vin Diesel grunts. And that's the whole movie. And it was what I expected, but I didn't like it one single bit.
Yeah, are you disappointed by the fact that that particular genre and formula is so popular today?
Well, when you see a movie like this going to make $1 billion, you have to wonder what our audience is paying to see today. There's much better stuff out there, better filmmaking, better writing, better acting, but this is what people want. It gives them a thrill, it gives them a sense of excitement. I actually went with some older people to see this, some people who had never seen any of the Fast and Furious films, and they said they felt excited watching this, and I think that's what does it. It's a sense of constant action and just repeated action that gives them a sense of excitement.
Yeah, you know, what that brings me to think about is essentially, going back to the earlier part of your career, what are movies for? Why do you go to the movies? What do movies provide that other forms of entertainment do not?
Movies provide for me a sense of connection with people who are thinking and feeling in an artistic way. So what I get out of a movie is a visual sense, an oral sense, and also an emotional, psychological sense of connection, or maybe even just stimulation. I get stimulated by movies the way I don't get stimulated in any other kind of art form, say painting or novels.
Well, it's moving pictures.
Moving pictures and connection with characters. To me, the most beautiful thing a movie shows is the human face, the expression that you can connect with and make you feel with. That's what I like about movies. Movies that do with the human face.
Well, in Sunset Boulevard, Gloria Swanson talks about the old days and says, we had faces then, which implies that at that period, movies no longer had faces. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, they don't. If you watch movies today, it's so rare that you see a close-up of a face that gives you an expression that you can identify and feel along with the character. It's very rare because they're so intent on action and plot and story. Trying to think of one that's recent. Nothing comes to mind. That shows you how rare it is.
Well, last week we watched a movie together, Dog Day Afternoon, where you had Al Pacino, where his face went through a gamut of expressions, and it reminds us that in movies, in the motion picture, great acting is often great reacting.
And that's what he was reacting to, something that was going on with his bank robber pal that really frustrated him. And just with his expression in his eyes, he showed how frustrated he was. And people in the audience laughed. They connected with what he felt. And by the way, Al Pacino doesn't do that these days, because I just saw Danny Collins, and he's nowhere near that connective with the audience the way he was back in the 70s with this movie.
People change.
People change, and yep, they do.
And they rest on their laurels as well.
Yeah.
So what are the movies that you feel are essential for any person who thinks they're well viewed or experienced in motion pictures. What are the pictures that are absolutely the most important to you?
Well, let me tell you about some of the discussions I get into with audience members who, I get people who tell me they won't see a movie because it's violent. They won't see a Sam Peckinpah movie because it's just too violent. Or they won't see anything else because there's violence in some shape or form. They don't want to see any kind of violence. And to me, movies are about sex and violence. If you don't like violence, then what are you doing at the movies? It's part of what they're about. The very first movie was The Great Train Robbery, which is about people shooting the bad guys who robbed the train. It's violent. That's what movies have been from the start, and they're going to continue to be that way.
So you come down on the side of violence when when it seems appropriate.
I come down on the side of movement and action, yes, except when it's the repetitious, crazy, nonsensical violence that you get in a Fast and Furious film or the Transformers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't like the Transformers either.
The Transformers, I saw the first two, and it's just, I felt like I was being punched like a punching bag. It's just fighting and falling apart and getting put back together and fighting again. And I can understand that it's basically a movie about a toy. Oh, you just made me think of something. I'm sorry, I have to come back to this. The movie that I did not expect much out of and really loved was the Lego movie.
Yes.
I thought that was just wonderful. It had the little discs that were great characters, that had great funny lines, and it was action. It moved the whole time. It was a nice movie for kids and adults too.
Yes, the Lego movie was very popular during 2014.
And that brings up another crucial situation. They don't make movies for regular moviegoers now. They don't make them for the general audiences. They make them for little markets. Each movie has a market that they want to appeal to, and they stick to the boundaries of that market.
And what are the most successful markets that studios are aiming their pictures for?
Well, there are two now. They're all teenage markets, but they're gender specific. So you get Transformers, Fast and Furious, which is teenage boys, and you get the young adult reader novels, which are teenage girls, like The Fault in Our Stars or The Hunger Games. Those are all aimed at teenage girls.
And are there, you mentioned the Lego movie, that would seem to be somewhere outside that.
Yeah, that was way outside that, which is why I liked it. For what, 4 or 5-year-old kids who don't go to the movies? But it was so, how do I describe it? It was so involving with the characters. It's amazing. I'm talking about how the human face is the best thing in a movie. Here you have this little color brick that doesn't move a face at all. It doesn't have any expression. Yet the dialogue is so potent and so involving, and the action keeps you tense and anxious and ready to see more, that I really loved the movie.
Yeah, well, you know, I agree. I loved it too. But it reminds me, Gary Cooper never acted much. And he was the greatest movie star we had at the time.
That's right. He was all reaction, yeah.
He was all reaction.
Yeah.
And that was, people who worked with him, other actors, would watch him when he was shooting a picture, and they would think, well, he's not doing so much. And then they'd go to the movie, and they see his face, and they realize how much information is being transmitted from a face that's basically non-expressive.
Well, like Michael Caine has always said in his famous Actors Workshop, acting for movies is done with the eyes. And I've always followed that and looked for that in when I watch a film.
All right. What are you doing now? Are you blogging? I
have a blog. It's called thehennesyreview.com, and I blog about mainly classic films. Sometimes I do recent films, but the internet is so full of reviews of movies that come out currently that I try to do some of the classic films. I'm trying to write for a younger audience, like a teen audience, that hasn't seen Citizen Kane, say, and try to get them involved in a way through reading my review that they want to see it.
Well, I think there's a place for that.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so, yeah.
So, Doug, what else can you tell us about your experience in your career as both a critic and a blogger? You indicated that you got to go to screenings early in your career, but things happened to you later on that you went to places where you got to interview some famous people.
I got to do some interviews on on sets actually as part. Those are back in the days when I actually did some newspaper writing. So what surprised me about going on set and doing the interviews is how unhappy a lot of people in the movie business were. At least that's the way it appeared to me. So when I interviewed Brian De Palma when he was making Blowout, he was shooting a scene where a car crashes off a road and falls into a creek, and he had to do this one scene. It took him 7 nights. He was working like midnight to 7 in the morning. He was on like his 3rd or 4th night of trying to do this one scene. It's all of like 15 seconds of the film, and he was just angry and frustrated, and it just seemed like something to me that I love so much. It seemed like, wow, millions of people would like to be doing what you're doing. It must be the greatest job in the world, and he was just so angry and frustrated. Also, I've interviewed some people who were like really out of it. Like when I tried to interview Robert Altman, he was so high on marijuana that I couldn't get a coherent sentence out of him. Couldn't use the interview.
Really?
Yeah.
What was the picture that he was doing at that time?
Oh, this was after he had finished McCabe and Mrs. Miller. Mm-hmm. So it's probably the mid-'70s, and he was making the rounds trying to just do some publicity. And he wasn't talking about that movie in particular. He was talking about his work.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about the difference in the audience today with the audience of what we would call the great golden age of Hollywood. You mentioned before that studios used to make movies for everybody. And by that, you know, after World War II, everybody in the United States would go to the movies at least once a week. And there were enormous profits.
Yeah, like, could you see a Gone with the Wind being made today? I mean, to me, the most recent example of Gone with the Wind, the movie that appealed to everybody, all genders, all ages, that people enjoyed and got something out of it, could talk about, had something in common to talk about after they saw the movie. I can't think of anything that's close to that today. Or they would even try to make it.
Would you throw Titanic into that?
I would throw Titanic into that range, yes. Titanic was probably the most recent one.
Yeah, Avatar?
Avatar, but remember, Titanic made money mainly because of Asian girls. That was their market. That made close to $1 billion because the Asian market really pulled that movie up.
But really was a teenage girls movie,
Teenage girl movie
that had the capacity to attract teenage boys because the ship sank.
There's some action in it.
And you could see little people falling off. So what are some other examples of movies that you think have had impact on audiences?
Oh, the most recent one I saw was Gone Girl. I thought that was a general audience movie. It was a big best-selling book, and it appealed to guys, it appealed to women, it appealed to house mothers, and it appealed to single women. It had just general audience appeal all across.
And yet, it thwarted their expectations.
Right. And the ending is not a happy ending where the bad guy gets, or the good guy gets the bad guy, or settled, or they kind of reconcile in a way that leaves you with a sense of angst. Like, what are they doing together?
Right.
Yeah.
So this is an example of it's a David Fincher movie, I believe, that he doesn't cater to the sense of satisfying the goal of the audience, which was to see what they expected. So I think that's useful to think about. Mm-hmm. Can you think of other pictures that have fallen into that same category? I mean, you can look at Fincher's other pictures, and many of them do the same thing. You know, going back to Seven or Social Network. They don't really deliver an expected emotional response that the audience wants. And that's something that is of use to us as audience members, that we wind up with an experience that is unique rather than one that is expected.
I have one that was not a success. Most people didn't see it. It was called The Most Violent Year. Mm-hmm. It's about a guy who's trying to stay out of the mob, and his wife and kids were trying to run a legitimate business and stay out of the mob influence of the business.
That's with Oscar Isaac and Jessica Chastain.
Jessica Chastain, yeah. And the end of that movie, he's kind of like left hanging. You don't know which direction he goes. And that's fine with me because he could go in either way, and probably he'll be a mix of both. If in real life, he would be a mix of both as he goes on with his life.
Yeah, that's a good example for something that's of interest to me, which is that audiences are difficult today in that they want a response that they can anticipate, and when they get something else, often they discount it. I mean, Most Violent Year did not do all that well at the box office. Right. And the reason for that, I think, is that you didn't get audiences into theaters to see it. And you know, that sounds silly, but that's really the difference. Because what we're looking at now in terms of the business model of Hollywood industry is enormously diverse. That it used to be you had feature films, and then you had television, and then you had feature films on television, and then you had cable, and now we have streaming, and we have enormous diversity of audiences.
Oh, that's the thing. Movies aren't only competing with TV, they're competing with video games, they're competing with streaming. There are all kinds of platforms that, I mean, if you talk to a business executive in Hollywood, they want to reach every platform they can. And so a movie doesn't have to appeal to everybody. It doesn't need that to make money. It can appeal to a certain market and still make a lot of money, because that certain market will come back and see it over and over again.
Yeah, particularly the teenage market.
Yeah, particularly teenagers.
Multiple viewings by the same people right. is a formula for great wealth.
Well, I would like to make a pitch for the audience that's being left out in today's movie business, and that is people over 50 who want to see movies about people who are honest and have legitimate feelings and about real life. People they can identify with, that they see themselves in. I mean, we have the boomer generation getting over 50, so you want to see movies about those kind of people now. The most recent example is The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. The two of them are very good movies for people over 50.
Yes. I have, you inspire me to bring up an additional thought on the same subject, which is what is the purpose of the movie experience? And that I think that experience has been diluted by the new formats where people now want to watch Lawrence of Arabia on their cell phone. It's like you don't see it. You don't have the capacity to fully experience a particular film if you're not sitting in a chair in a dark room with 300 strangers.
I'll tell you about an experience I had. I got to see an original print of Sunset Boulevard, which was being shown for a class at the University of Oregon. So I went to the Bijou to see this, and the kids from the class come in, and they're texting during the whole movie. I don't think one of them was watching it. And the reason why, I asked them, I said, well, this is an old black and white movie. This is like an assignment. This is no fun to see. The idea that this was a classic movie, that a must-see, was not in their heads at all.
Well, what we're looking at is not just the separation and disbursement of the audience, but really the loss of an experience, a group experience that can only be experienced by people in groups and not diverted people who are looking at cell phone screens. It's like there's a way that movies have traditionally affected us, and that's viscerally, and that's with reactions that are supported from people all around us. Right. It's like we talked earlier about having anxiety in the movies. There's a reason that classical movies had anxieties you could get through, because there was no escape. There was no escape from the anxiety in the room that was created by that movie. If you watch it on television, when anxiety comes up, you go to the bathroom. Right. You go to the refrigerator. You do whatever you can to knock down the experience of anxiety, which is the essence of the movie experience.
Well, not only that, to me, it's not anxiety, it's also a sense of angst that when you leave the theater that everything is not well and right and all wrapped up and you just can go home and snuggle under your covers and go to bed. You have some sense of thinking and challenging your mind that runs through your head after you see the movie. See, to me, one of my favorite sayings is, you don't really see a movie until you talk about it. And after you see it, you should always go with a group who's seen it with you and discuss and see different viewpoints. And people will share those anxieties and what they feel. And you can get all kinds of different points of view.
Yeah, this audience watching us now may not know that we have a group on Tuesday night called Behind the Lens, same title as this series, that is designed particularly for that experience.
And it works very well, doesn't it?
Well,
I've been going to it for years, and one of the reasons I go is because we have an after-movie discussion, which I think is always interesting.
And do you feel that the people in that group are gaining something different than they would get from a television program?
Yes, very much so. And it's the difference between movies and TV, which I think is still hard for a lot of people to figure out. People a lot of times today go to the movies expecting a TV show. They expect the good guy to win in the end and everything to be wrapped up and go home and everything's fine. Whereas a lot of directors and story writers don't even think that way.
I think you and I are of one mind in this issue that the thrill of going to the movies is something that is essentially valuable to the human condition, or has been for the last 100 years.
Well, it's a group story, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Go ahead with that.
It's like sitting around the campfire having somebody tell you a story and you get all that thrill and all that expectation and all that tension and anxiety. I mean, that's real interesting. If you want to go have a good experience, go see something like Saw or Insidious with a total teenage audience. And these kids use this as a date movie. You have lots of couples watching these horror movies. And the reason is they get tense and anxious and they can snuggle up to each other and feel everything's great. It's a real interesting experience to watch the reaction.
Yeah, it's not what we grew up with.
No.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank Doug Hennessy for being our guest on this episode.
Thank you for asking me.
And tell us one more time about your blog and how people can...
It's called thehennesyreview.com.
Spell it.
Hennessy, just like the brandy. So check it out, and you'll get some interesting reading.
All right, thank you all very much, and catch us next time on Behind the Lens.